Welcome to the Autism Central podcast, the home of real stories, honest conversations, and shared wisdom from England's National Autism Peer Education Programme. Here we bring together autistic people and the people who love, support, and care for autistic people of all ages and backgrounds to explore every aspect of life. The National Autism Peer Education Programme is delivered by Anna Freud and commissioned by the NHS. Through education, coaching, and connection, we offer resources, group webinars, one-to-one peer support, and community events that centre lived experience and build real understanding. Our vision is a society where autistic people, their families, and those who support them are empowered, connected, and thriving. This is your space, your community, your podcast. Welcome to Autism Central. Joining me today is Hazel Lim, an AuDHDer, a mum of 3 neurodivergent children, and a multi-award winning community advocate whose work is shaped by her own lived experience and a deep commitment to creating more inclusive, culturally aware understandings of neurodivergence. After moving to Swansea in 2015 to study autism and related conditions and to deepen her understanding of her elder son's neurodifferences, Hazel began connecting with other Chinese families navigating autism. Many were experiencing not only language barriers but also a strong cultural pressure to keep autism hidden, making it difficult to access information, seek understanding, or feel able to talk openly about their experiences. Through her own experiences, Hazel saw how widespread and deeply felt this was, particularly for mothers, and began creating informal, peer-led spaces where families could talk openly, share honestly, and learn from one another without judgment. What started as a small grassroots conversations grew into the Chinese Autism Support Group in 2016, and later into the Chinese Autism Community Interest Company, which she founded in 2021. Hazel also created the UK's first Chinese and English bilingual autism resource, helping to improve understanding between families and professionals across different services. Wow, that's quite an introduction, isn't it, Hazel? Welcome to the podcast today. Welcome to Autism Central. Thank you for being here. The place I thought we could start is your own journey, and I touched on some of that, didn't I, as I was introducing you there. But as an AuDHDer, as a parent of 3 neurodivergent children, how has your own journey shaped the way that you support other families in the work that you do?
Hello, Catherine. Um, yeah, I always tell people that I live and work at a very unique intersection. My journey didn't start in the lecture hall or through reading academic papers. It all started at my own kitchen and in the school corridors. I support family from the trenches because I have spent over a decade navigating those exact same trenches myself. It all began when my eldest son was 4. I didn't know anything about neurodivergent, and that was the first time that the term autism came into my life. And I didn't know what that means then. But my maternal instinct told me that he was interacting the world differently, not like those paper describing as deficit way, as an impairment. So then I kept knocking on doors at his school, speaking to teachers, until someone who actually understood and suggested the term Asperger's at that time. And from that moment, I think my whole life shifted. I myself, I realize now as a older, I really don't stay on surface of anything. I have to go deep. So at that time when that term came into my life, I threw myself into learning. I wanted to know more what is that and how I can support my son at that time. So books and information from the internet was just not enough. That's why I, eventually led me into this postgraduate studies, and I finished my master degree at the age of 38. But thankfully to my ADHD engine, really, that definitely has kicked me into to do it now and hyper focus mode for that. But that was a crazy contradiction of my brain. I could do a massive life decision at that time, like, I'm moving the whole entire family from London to Wales and focus deeply on the complex neurodivergence kind of theory learning. And my brain was completely shut down when it came to basic day to day chores. My life was absolute chaos at that time. I have got these three very young toddlers running around, socks, nappies was piling up everywhere in the house. And I was just constantly forgetting where my key was and what time I have to go out. But I could analyze an entire medical textbook. I just couldn't manage the simple household routine at that time. I remember this very clearly, when during my very first semester of doing my master, I was reading a literature late at night. And that was that moment where I looked at the pages and went, oh my goodness, this is me. I put myself forward then for ADHD assessment right then and there. My autism was discovered much later on. But when I got my ADHD diagnosis at that time, and I was being offered medication, and I paused for a second, and I accepted it straight away. Part of it was purely out of curiosity, how that can change me, how that can be, help me in any way. But I also wanted to know how many types of medication there were. And I wanted to know how that can help me to share my experience later on for the people that I was supporting. So I actually eventually tried many different types over the few years.
Mm. And what did you find from that? What was your experience, Hazel, in trying those different types of medications? What did it do for you? What did it change?
And that was important, Catherine, because that lived experience was real. I can tell you exactly how it felt when that medication entered my bloodstreams. I can feel suddenly my mind was in slow motion and calming the chaos, and I can feel my speech was slowing down. It's very strange. I feel like I was in slow motion in every movement. So I asked my friend next to me, am I speaking in a slow motion? They say no. But that was a dramatic kind of experience for me. It was real. So I think over the years, as I discover more and more of myself, I was finally nowadays, while I was speaking to you now, I'm able to untangle how two engines of my brain work in me, at the same time. I live with two opposing forces pulling in opposite direction all day and at all times. I don't know if you I don't know if you will relate to this, but that autistic engine experience um, sensory overload very easily. While my ADHD engine, is almost like constantly um, sensory seeking. One crave for strict routine and other desperately crave for changes. So gaining this kind of deep knowledge of sensory regulation that actually helped me and saved the whole family dynamic, to be honest. It is how my life and my family now, we are feeling completely in charge now. I remember I used to wonder, why did I suddenly out of the blue shouting at my children. But now I know it was because I now understand my nervous system. I realize at those times when I feel intense, overwhelmed, and subconsciously anxious, it was because there was movement behind my back. So back then, when I was washing the dishes after dinner, my children were playing around and laughing behind me. And that was the time when I would suddenly, get too overwhelmed and melt down and start shouting. So now I don't do washing anymore. I don't do wash dishes anymore. My family, they will honestly rather do them themselves so that they don't get a crazy shouting mom. And now and now when I go to cafes or restaurant, I always choose to sit where um, at a corner or against the wall that um, I don't get overwhelmed myself. So I can actually put some arrangement in place that I'm more in control and to help me to not get sensory overload.
Yeah, and understanding that and knowing that is so
Yeah,
important, isn't it? And I just think for the people listening, the parents who are listening, who through and we've spoken on this in the podcast series so far, but how parenthood, motherhood, how that can just unravel all of that scaffolding that you have put in place in your life, even if you didn't know that you were AuDHD before that, of how it all can come crashing down around you when, 3 young toddlers, you're doing a master's, you're washing up, you've got sensory overwhelm. It's a
yeah,
lot, isn't it? But if you don't know that when
no.
you embark on this journey of parenting.
Yeah. And that is what exactly taught me to listen to the family I support deeply these days, because I remember those pain and the days that I've been through, and especially those times that when I was not being listened to. I remember when I went to school to speak up for my second son. Now I've got two autistic sons, but my younger son is his presentation is totally different from my eldest, and I was hoping to get some help, but then I was completely dismissed. My son was highly intelligent and bright in masking himself as his struggle, so the school did not see that. While at home, I was like really hoping that I can help him because he was really shut down at home. But it was really exhausting going to school, speaking to people that don't really ready to listen to you. So I think I strongly believe the battle should never be this hard. Parents shouldn't have to go to the war with every institution meant to help them. The people working around this family should be a team, standing around the child, lifting them out instead of like building this wall that wasted all our precious energy. So I think now when I coach individual or family today, I don't give them textbook theories. I really give them a real unfiltered live truth to help them tear down all those walls and to empower them to find their own safe spaces.
Mm. And we know, don't we, that for many families, autism can be something that's really hard to talk about. But within parts of the Chinese community, that silence can be especially strong, can't it? Where where do you think that silence comes from, and what's the impact that it can have on the families that you see and support, Hazel?
Yeah, thank you for asking this, Catherine. The silence in the Chinese community is so heavy, it feels physical. It is rooted in a cultural psychological that is completely different from Western society. So, but I want to be very clear. I'm not comparing these two cultures to say one is better than the other because every culture has its own flaws and its own beauty. But we have to look honestly at how different cultural lenses shape our beliefs. And the truth is, neurodivergence is always going to be struggle to sit well within the Chinese cultural traditional expectation. In British culture, I've lived here for more than 2 decades now. I think I like it, when there is strong emphasis on individualism and standing up for your rights. If a British child is struggling, the cultural instinct is often to advocate, challenge the school, and demand support. But in Chinese culture, we are collectivists. We are raised to blend in, to maintain that social harmony, and above all, to preserve, the face, we call it face, 面子, not just for ourselves, but for the entire family life, for the entire Chinese community. So having a child who is different is often internalized as a profound shame, a failure of parenting, or even a genetic curse. So when we talk about that immense specific weight displaced on women under traditional culture, historically, as a woman, I was told that our role is deeply tied to the domestic sphere and the success of the children. There is an unspoken, heavy expectation that mother is entirely responsible for how the children turn out to be. So if a child is flourishing, the family takes the credit. But if a child is struggling, masking, or diagnosed with a neurodivergence condition, the community often turns its gaze directly onto the mother. He is blamed to not raising them right, or have done something wrong in their pregnancy to make this happen. So because of this intense pressure, I think I can see a lot of my fellow Chinese mother, they carry more than double layer of isolation. They are, they are not just protecting their child from system they don't understand. They are actively hiding their struggles to protect themselves from severe judgment, blame, and rejection within our very own extended families and communities. Our traditional education system reinforces this silence as well because we are not taught critical thinking on how to look at system analytically. It teaches absolute obedience. We have to memorize, all the things that we learn, and conformity to authority. We are trained to accept the person at the top that tell you who you are. So when the diagnosis was given, even if they present it as neutral as, neuro differences, a Chinese parent, especially mother who facing blame, naturally will internalize it as a negative, deeply personalized, personal deficit because of our culture conditioning. They are not empowered to look past the label and see it as a different kind of strength. Instead, they simply accept the silent, heavy verdict that their child is fundamental flawed. So I think the other things that very important to address is the language. Even our language locked the door to the conversation. In Chinese, in Mandarin, or in Cantonese, the literal translation of autism is called 自闭症孤独症, which basically means self-closed disease, loneliness disease. It tells people right from the start that their child has a broken, infectious medical condition. So can you imagine, Catherine, who would want to claim a label like that? Family, they retreat into this absolute silence. They hide because they feel unsafe. And they stay silent because they fear that showing vulnerability will make them targeted for more judgment and discrimination. Yeah.
Which makes the work that you do and the organization that you have created to support families and parents even more important, even more courageous for what you're doing. I mean, those words that you have used there to kind of translate what autism, or how autism is viewed in the Chinese community. What helped you? What helped you kind of, I'm trying to think about how to phrase this, but what really helped you to be able to step into that level of vulnerability, Hazel, to not only explore your own neurodivergence, but also that of your children? What was it for you that, because facing all of that shame and silence and shunning.
Yeah, I think I have many So throughout the years, I have been, to be honest, I was discouraged many times, Catherine. But I think it was the younger generation that gave me the motivation. Um, I look at my own son. He is now 18, turning 19 very soon, and he is in university, thriving, and he's happy. He was able to choose what he liked. But that was all because we, as a family, that we broke that silence. We embraced his identity and created a neuroaffirming environment for him and us, so that he's now independent, and it's beautiful to see. But my heart breaks when I think of the other, maybe another 10 or 20 other 19-year-old from the diverse background whom I was supporting, because their identity were buried at home under layers of cultural shame, parental guilt, and lack of critical discussion. And many of them, when they hit 19 and they are lost, they were trapped in a terrifying internal war. Their parents look at them and claim, they are not capable in independence. But I tell those parents directly, it's not that young person who has failed. It is us, us as a parent in the Chinese community. What have we done as a whole to support them? We have failed to create a safe environment for them to be able to understand themselves. The community and the culture are consistently shouting at them that you are not good enough if you are just yourself. So they are forced to suffocate who they are. And autism becomes this heavy, invisible block of blur in their lives that they are forbidden to talk deep into. So I really hope, by talking about this today, and often a lot of conversation that I had with many people, that we can clear that blur, lift that crushing weight of the mother in our community, and give those family the permission to speak without shame. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. It sounds like though this is not an individual endeavor, is it? This is about a
it
collective
is.
endeavor. And you were talking there about, you yourself being discouraged from exploring an autism
Yeah,
diagnosis, going through that assessment. But actually it was your family who supported you to do that, and that sounds like that's the work that you're doing, but there will be many barriers, won't they, to the families that you support, the barriers that they face, which you've touched on some of those, about seeking support, seeking a diagnosis, some of the barriers for understanding their autistic children. What are some of those barriers, Hazel? I know you have touched on some of those, but I just really want to explore some more of those, because we often talk about barriers, but I think there are,
they are unique barriers. Yeah,
yeah, absolutely
yeah,
unique.
yeah. I think to truly understand the barriers of what the minority families in living in the UK are facing, we have to look at the raw and vanished reality of intersectionality. Many of these families, they are migrants. They are living in a foreign land that they are not familiar with, completely on their own, strip off the traditional village of extended family network. The crushing weight of carrying role falls solely on our own shoulder, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. I have many friends, they are really, you know, tired during the week. But at the weekends, they have got grandparents or auntie or uncles that can look after their children for a couple of hours, and that really helps. But here we don't. We don't have that kind of support, and the statutory services are completely inaccessible to many of us because they simply do not have the English language skill required to formally navigate the help, because all the available external support, leaflet helplines are not in the language they can comprehend. They are effectively locked out of the system. At the same time, I think schools or people that would have direct um, contact with this family, they lack of cultural competence to look past the surface of this politeness of how the parents and the children are presenting. They cannot see the family is sitting right at their breaking point. School has never able to step in, to make that necessary social care or medical referral. Sadly, I was hoping school can be a bit more proactive in seeing those things, because by not doing so, that result in a life of absolute terrifying isolation for this family, because of cultural stigma that we talked about early on. This family, the mothers especially, internalize everything. They hold the shame, they hold the grief, and they swallow the blame thrown at them by their partners, their extended families back home. They are navigating an entirely foreign country while trapped in this psychological prison. We talk a lot about well-being, mental health these days, but these parents, they cannot afford to collapse, because if they go down, the whole family collapses. They are in the permanent survival mode, suffocating in the silent. And many of them also dealing with immigration vulnerabilities, visa stress. And for anyone that is not going through this, it's difficult to imagine, because you don't have that kind of lived experience. The fear of systematic judgment, and they do not know who to trust. They were afraid by reviewing some information might jeopardize their application. So they are caught between this Western medical system that demand them to speak out, and the cultural background that has trained them to stay hidden to survive. So they are trying to find an entry point into a system that wasn't built for them, speaking a language they haven't mastered while carrying an invisible backpack that is breaking their backs. They are completely strained. Yeah.
And what do you see then with the families that you support, Hazel? Because there's lots of things there that you have just touched on, and this lack of the village. We talk about the village, don't we? The lack of the village, all of that cultural stigma, all of those things combined. And you spoke there about swallowing it all, holding it all in, not being able to unravel or fall apart or have a crisis, or any of that. So, where does all that go? Because if all of that is held, what do you see then in the mothers, in the families that you are supporting through your work?
I think in the positive side is that, some children, some young people, they find their way eventually, but many of them, the family are usually at the breaking point. They suffer quietly. And while, I'm advocating for them, I'm advocating for more professional to know all about this, so that, we can provide a more equity services and society for everyone to live in, or the neurodivergence from the diverse community, but it's not always success. There are a lot of misconception that the professionals are still holding these days.
Yeah. What are some of those misconceptions? What are some of them that you think some of those professionals might have about Chinese families, about autism?
Yeah, I think there is a massive
Mm,
systemic misconception among our British Western kind of professionals. And it stems from a total misunderstanding from our cultural behavior sometimes, because Chinese culture deeply values politeness that I mentioned earlier on, and humility, and absolute respect for authority. Parents will often sit in the meeting, nodding, and stay quiet to refuse to make any scene. So professional, when they look at this surface behavior and assume. So assumption is a critical part here. So people, they assume, oh, they are smiling, they are not complaining, so they must be happy and coping fine with all this. They completely mistaken our cultural survival mechanism for a lack of need. They don't see the absolute panic, the mental health crisis, and the profound isolation happening behind all those doors. And on top of that, the professional frequently also have an assumption that if a child has a speech delay in school, that must simply because the family isn't speaking English to them at home. This is the assumption that I see all the time. So they write it off as a bilingual language issue, completely missing the underlying neurodivergence and delaying crucial early intervention. And I even have some educational professionals encouraging parents to speak English to their children at home, which is, I think personally totally unacceptable because that's not for the best interest of the child. And we know that there's a lot of research supporting, bilingualism that will actually encourage the development of speech, isn't it? So yeah, so what does true cultural informed autism support would actually look like in practice? So I think firstly, um, the absolutely easiest thing to do is provide direct language support to strip away the most fundamental barrier. So we talk about barriers just now, Catherine. I think language is the easiest, the baseline requirement that, completely durable for most statutory services, whether it's health, educational, or social services. In my perspective, definitely, but in their perspective, sometimes, that has to do with funding, that has to do with some political issues, I don't know. But I think that cannot be that cannot be a tick boxes service, definitely. And I always emphasize this, Catherine. I always want professionals to hear me loud and clear that not just a tick boxes, not just using a interpreter is good enough. It is definitely absolutely not good enough if you just go to any agency, just request a standard interpreter. Because if an interpreter is not specifically trained in autism and neuroaffirming principles, they can do a massive amount of damage. Reason being, that I mentioned that in our Chinese terminology and the language around neurodiversity is deeply broken. So untrained interpreter will naturally fall back on highly medicalized harmful language. They will use the word literally translate into disease, patient, abnormal, things like that. Yeah.
Mm. Yeah, and that basic language requirement that you talk about there, the implications of that then, if we're already talking about the cultural shame and the cultural stigma that exists around autism, that particularly mothers carry in the Chinese community, then hearing that, if you were sat there hearing that for the very first time via an interpreter, that there is something fundamentally wrong with your child, or your child has a disease or a curse, or it's your fault as a mother,
Yeah, yeah.
this is your failure.
Yeah, absolutely. And also that completely destroy the trust, between the
Mm,
professional and the family. Yeah. So I think we must treat that cultural barriers with a exact same seriousness that we treat disability as well. Think about this way. If we have additional needs pupil in the classroom, a good teacher doesn't just ignore their barriers and expect them to learn like everyone else, isn't it? We will come up with we call it IEP or IDP, individualized plan, so that the student can get the most out of that lesson, they can thrive in that environment. So I think we need to apply that exact same logic to our healthcare appointments and school lessons, school meetings, and intersectional family coming into a clinic that has additional cultural needs to help them to get the most out of that appointment. System must adapt to them, not to just assuming these families will understand like every other family.
And from your experience, Hazel, is that culturally informed autism support, is that being offered? Is that being applied in practice?
No, hardly. Yeah, I have to say, I think we are moving towards a better society now. I have to say, but often what I still see is that we are. we are told with the funding restraint, we are told that, there are some, to me, that unacceptable reason that they can't offer certain kind of adjustment to the family. So I think this has to overcome. We have to overcome as a whole, everyone. So I think, Catherine, I appreciate, that we're having this talk today. So I'm hoping this conversation can reach out to more and far. So people who are in control, have the authority, if we start from ourselves to make that little adjustment, I think that will give a lot of families more opportunities.
Yeah, I mean, it's even the professionals out there, health professionals, educational professionals, um, people who need to listen to this episode, who start that, just even that level of awareness
Yes,
and
yes.
curiosity that actually everything that you're talking about here, that there's something that they can do. Um, and there's something that maybe they have some control over, like you say, or maybe some way that they can understand a little bit more.
This is definitely not a criticism. I'm really, I always say, I'm here to empower them with, because if you don't know about it, there's nothing that you can do about it, isn't it? But when you know about it, then within your ability, there must have something that you can do to make that small changes to make things become easier.
Yeah. I remember the first time I spoke to you on the podcast a few years ago, Hazel, and I learned so much from our conversation. I learned so much from all the conversation on the podcast, but certainly your conversation. It was the first time that I heard that there was no word in the Chinese language for autism, and literally what it translated to, and what people's understanding was. And it's like anything, isn't it? The more that you are immersed in something, the more that you learn about something, the more
Yeah,
knowledge that you get, that Dunning-Kruger effect, that the more that you learn, the more that you think everybody knows what you know. But actually, there will be many people listening to this who also have never heard that ever before, um, who won't be aware of that are now aware of that. But I'm also conscious, Hazel, of the I suppose the incredible weight and pressure that must be on you as an advocate in your community to be the person talking about this, because that stigma, that cultural stigma and shame hasn't shifted. It hasn't been eradicated. Um, and you are continuously putting yourself into this role as educator, as advocate, as somebody here to empower and help change. That must be a huge weight for you.
it is. It is. Yeah. So yeah, I think in the flip side, I think I also get a lot of um, joy um, through doing this work. There are times that I feel really discouraged, but there are times that I gained a lot of joy when I spending time with um, some neurodivergence children and young people and see how they grow from, you know, strength to strength, and family as well. I over the years, I think I see maybe not huge amount compared to if we're talking about numbers, but the value, the quality of the growth in the individuals that I mean, children, young people, parent, carer, and that change in them, how that will change in their life, that is massive and that is hugely rewarding. So I think that has become the source of my motivation and to keep marching on. Yeah.
And if there are any families, parents, mothers, fathers, grandparents, anybody who's listening, autistic people themselves, who feel isolated, who feel misunderstood, or maybe they're afraid to talk openly about autism within their community, What's one thing you'd like them to know?
Yeah, although I think this podcast might not reach directly to the Chinese families, but to any families, I think, or any individuals that's listening right now who feels completely isolated, terrified, or ashamed to speak openly, I'm hoping that you hear me. I am a woman from a color background, navigating a Western lens where we were unavoidably face discrimination, racism, and inequality while juggling immense pressure. And I'm also the sole breadwinner for my family because my husband, who has extreme social anxiety, are out of employment for 2 decades. And I'm raising three neurodivergent children. Most days I am managing exhausting full-time schedule of schools and hospitals. But despite all of that, I can stand here today and tell you that I'm one of the strongest women I have ever known. And I didn't find that strength by waiting for a broken system to save me. I found it by gaining that deeper understanding of myself, tuning out of those external noise of judgment and finding my own safe space. I created a neuroaffirming environment for myself and my family to live in. And this is how I know I can live a calmer life and how I know my children can grow in confidence. Our children are not a disease. And, you know, you are not a failure. People living in the intersectionality just need more time to undo what we were told was wrong and more time to navigate those layers from deeper understanding so that we can be empowered to embrace our own differences, our children's differences, and to step away from shame. Listen to our own heart and know that we are not alone. You are not alone. There's a community, maybe not directly Chinese community, but the neurodivergence community in this podcast, for example, Autism Central, for example, are waiting to embrace us. So I need everyone listening to understand something vital. Just because you don't hear these voices in the system, it doesn't mean that they are not there. For the professionals, for people that can make changes, or, you don't have to have a great authority, but I'm sure everyone can make some difference here. I'm here today, standing here to present thousands of silent voices that are probably painfully, desperately hoping to be supported, but simply do not know how to or where to find that support. I am also speaking out for the younger generation because they deserve to be provided with a neuroaffirming environment where they can safely understand themselves and thrive. But we cannot do this in isolation in our own corner, just within the Chinese community in the UK. We can only achieve this beautiful future when professional school services and families all come together in the collective advocacy. So, if you ask me if I could change one thing and about how service work, I think it is this, that all of us must realize that language support and cultural support must go hand in hand. There must be an inseparable package because together they create safe space and build trust. Neuroaffirming service only, come with cultural competency can be completed. So I think at the moment now, services think tackling language barrier is a separate minor checkbox, but it isn't. It is the simplest, most immediate thing people could do to help. So please do it without hesitation. True support means combining accurate, neuroaffirming language with a deep compassion understanding of cultural stigma. We need to build that trust.
Such powerful, powerful words to finish our conversation. And the language barrier. this episode will be a language barrier to so many in the Chinese community because I'm not speaking in Chinese. You know, you're coming on here and talking to me in my language. I'm not talking to you in your language. And I think that that's something, you know, I want to take away for the podcast for Autism Central is about how do we make sure that episodes like this can really reach the community who need to hear it the most. And that's something I definitely want to take away. And I really want to invite people who are listening to think about their own day-to-day lives. You know, if you're a professional who's listening, if you're professionals who work in education or health or mental health, from what Hazel said, what you can also take away. So thank you so much, Hazel. I know that you are full of cold, and you've come back, haven't you, from traveling, from working away. So I really appreciate you coming today and sharing this with us.
Oh, thank you for having me, Catherine. Thank you. Thank you. It's my absolute pleasure. Thank you so much.
If any of the topics mentioned in today's episode are of special interest to you and you'd like to discuss this further, you can book a one-to-one session with a peer guide on our website at www.autismcentral.nhs.uk. Autism Central would encourage listeners to do their own research and make informed decisions about any strategies or equipment mentioned in this podcast. Any advice or suggestions given by a guest or peer guide do not replace or substitute advice received from direct consultation with a qualified professional. The Autism Central podcast is produced by Autism Central and is the copyright of the NHS.